My name is Greta. I am 24 years old, and I live in Berlin. I take care of plants in office buildings. It is quiet work. I water the plants, clean the leaves, and check if they get enough light. I like the smell of wet soil and green leaves in the morning. Most offices are empty when I go in. Only the lights and machines are awake. I work for a small company that takes care of offices across the city. Every week I visit the same buildings. I move from floor to floor, room to room. Some people smile at me. Some do not see me at all. I do not mind. My work is calm. Plants do not speak, but they still make the air softer. One of the buildings I visit belongs to a large company. It has many offices and long glass windows. The rooms are clean and quiet. The people there wear suits and walk fast. I always start on the top floor and move down slowly. That is where I first saw Mr. Meyer. He was sitting at his desk when I entered his office. Papers were everywhere, but everything looked in order. He had gray hair, round glasses, and a small watch on his wrist. He looked like someone who had lived the same day many times. When I said, "Good morning," he looked surprised, then smiled softly and said, "Good morning." I watered the plants near his window. There were 2 tall ones and they were dry. He asked, "Do they need a lot of care?" I said, "Only a little. They need light and water, just like people." He smiled again and said, "Then maybe I should stand near the window more often." I did not know how to answer, so I just smiled. After that day, I often saw him when I came in. He always sat at his desk early, before most workers arrived. He never played music, never spoke loudly. Sometimes I heard him sigh or whisper numbers to himself. I worked quietly, moving between rooms, but I always saved his office for last. I liked the silence there. One morning he looked pale. I asked if he was all right. He said, "Just a little tired." Then he looked at the plants and said, "They look better than me." I said, "That is because they have someone to take care of them." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "Maybe that is what I need too." I did not know what he meant, but his words stayed with me all day. As weeks passed, I learned small things about him. He worked as an accountant. He had been in the same company for more than 20 years. He said he liked his work because it was safe. "Numbers don't lie," he said once, "but people do. Sometimes." I asked if he liked people. He said, "I used to." We started to talk a little every time I came in, just small things. I told him about the plants that bloomed in spring. He told me about the new computer system that confused everyone in the office. Once, he said he liked how I always looked calm. I said, "Plants teach that." He laughed softly. It was the first time I heard him laugh. Sometimes he asked me to sit for a few minutes before I left. He offered me tea. His desk was always full of papers, but there was always one clean corner for the teacups. He talked about his work, about the company, about how time moves too fast. I listened. I did not speak much. I liked the sound of his voice. It was slow and kind. I did not tell anyone about him. It felt like a small secret. In the office, people walked by us, busy and loud, but we stayed quiet. It was like the world outside moved fast, and inside his office time stood still. One day, I came in and he looked different. His shirt was pressed, and he had a new tie. He said, "You always see me at work. I should look my best." I smiled and said, "The plants like that?" He said, "And you?" I felt shy and said, "Maybe I do too." After that, he started waiting for me. He knew the days when I came, and sometimes he brought flowers for me, small ones. He said they were from the market near his house. I did not know what to say, but I thanked him. It felt strange to receive flowers from a man whose plants I watered. He never talked about his family, and I did not ask. Once I said, "Do you live alone?" He said, "Yes, I live near the river. It's quiet there." He did not say more. His eyes looked tired. One Friday, when I came to the office, he seemed nervous. He stood up when he saw me. He said, "Greta, I have something to tell you." I put down my bag and waited. He said, "I want to get married." For a second, I thought he was joking, but he looked serious. I did not know what to say. He said, "I'm not asking now. I just want you to know. I think about you a lot." I felt my heart beat fast. I said, "You don't know me very well." He said, "Maybe, but you are the only person who talks to me like I am still alive." I could not look at him. I said softly, "You are kind, Mr. Meyer." He said, "Please call me Eric." I said, "All right, Eric." After that, things changed. He smiled more. He asked when I would come next. Once, he waited for me outside the building. He walked with me to the bus stop. We did not speak much, but it felt warm to have someone beside me. Then one morning, everything felt wrong. I entered the office and saw people whispering. They stopped talking when they saw me. I went to Eric's office, but the door was closed. After a few minutes, he came out. He looked pale again. He said, "Greta, my boss called me in. He heard that I planned to marry you." I said, "Why is that bad?" He said, "He thinks it looks bad. He said I should stop seeing you or leave the company." I stared at him. He said, "I have been here my whole life. I don't know how to start again." I said quietly, "You have to choose." He looked at me for a long time. He said, "I will tell him tomorrow." That night, I could not sleep. I thought about him sitting alone at his desk, counting numbers, afraid to lose what he knew. I wondered what I was to him, a person or just something soft in his gray world. The next day, he did not come to the office at the usual time. When he finally did, he walked straight to his room. I waited outside for a moment, then went in. He was sitting at his desk, his eyes on the wall. He said, "I told him." I asked, "What did you say?" He said, "I said I will get married." I felt a small smile on my face, but he looked down and said, "Not to you. To my office." I did not move. He stood up, took his coat, and said, "It is safer this way. The office never asks for anything. It never leaves." Then he walked past me, slow and calm. I stayed there for a while. The plants near the window looked green and full of life. I picked up my watering can and gave them water. My hands were shaking, but the plants did not notice. Before I continue rest of the story, please like, subscribe, share, and tell me where you are listening from. Your support means a lot to me. Now let's continue. After that day, I did not go to his office for a week. I asked my manager to send someone else. I said I was not feeling well. It was not a lie. I woke up each morning and felt empty. I went to other buildings, other rooms, but every green leaf reminded me of him. I tried not to think about his words, but they stayed in my head. "I will marry my office." I could still see his face when he said it. Calm, cold, certain. The city outside kept moving. People waited for buses. Children shouted near the market. Cars passed in long lines. But to me, the air felt still. I walked slowly and looked at windows, at lights behind glass, at men and women sitting at desks. I thought, maybe everyone in this city is married to something. A job, a habit, a fear. One morning my manager called me. She said, "Greta, we need you back at the tall building. The other worker is sick." I wanted to say no, but I said yes. When I arrived, the air inside felt the same. Clean and dry. The sound of typing came from far rooms. I walked with my bag and small watering can. I told myself, "You are only here to work." When I entered Eric's office, it was empty. The chair was there, the papers, the pen on the desk, but not him. I looked at the plants. They were green, but dry. I touched the leaves. They felt weak. I gave them water slowly. Then the door opened. He came in. He looked at me, and for a moment, we both said nothing. Then he spoke softly. "You came back." I said, "I am working." My voice sounded cold, but I could not help it. He said, "I thought you would never come again." I said, "Plants cannot wait for feelings." He smiled a little, but his eyes looked sad. "The boss was pleased," he said. "He said I made the right choice." I did not answer. He sat at his desk. I finished watering the plants and turned to leave. Then he said, "Greta, please wait." I stopped. He said, "Do you think I made the wrong choice?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that life is not safe, that love is not a number. But I knew he would not understand. I said quietly, "You made your choice. It is yours now." He looked down at his hands. "I did what I had to do." I said, "Maybe, but you will be alone." He said, "I have always been alone." I said, "Then maybe you do not know what you lost." He said, "I lost peace." I said, "No. You lost something you never tried to keep." I turned and left before he could say more. That night, I walked home under the streetlights. The air smelled of rain. I thought about him again, sitting at his desk, counting money for people who would never know his name. He gave his time, his years, his heart to a room full of papers, and he called that life. I decided I did not want that kind of life. In the weeks that followed, I asked to be moved to another group of offices. My manager agreed. I started visiting new buildings, smaller ones with fewer people. I liked those places more. They were quiet, but not empty. I met kind workers who said hello and sometimes offered tea. One office had a small balcony with old plants. I liked to sit there for a few minutes after work. The city noise sounded far away. The air felt light. I thought about how people grow like plants, slow and silent, but only if they get light. Sometimes, when I passed near Eric's building, I looked up. The windows all looked the same. I could not tell which one was his. I wondered if he still sat there every day, in the same chair, with the same light. One afternoon, months later, I met one of the reception workers from his company. She recognized me and said, "Oh, you used to come to our offices. Mr. Meyer still talks about his plants. He takes care of them himself now." I asked, "Are they alive?" She said, "Yes, very much. He waters them every day at the same time." I thanked her and smiled. It was a small comfort. That evening, I thought about what she said. He had learned to water the plants himself. Maybe that was his way of remembering me. Maybe he still thought of me sometimes when he saw the green leaves near the window. But I knew we would never meet again. Some people only meet for a short time. Some moments come quietly and leave without noise. I learned that not every connection has a future, but everyone leaves a trace. As months passed, I found peace in my work again. I saved some money and moved to a small flat with more sunlight. I filled it with plants. Tall ones, small ones, some with flowers. Every morning I gave them water and watched them grow. It felt good to care for something that did not ask questions. One evening, I opened the window and looked outside. The sky was turning orange. I thought of Eric again. I imagined him at his desk, alone but calm, maybe thinking that the office was his only home. I did not feel anger anymore, only quiet sadness. I realized then that love is not always about being together. Sometimes it is about understanding someone even when you cannot change them. A few weeks later, my company gave me a new client, a design firm across the city. The offices were bright and full of color. The people there smiled often. One young man said, "You take care of the plants so well. They look happy." I said, "They just need care every day." He said, "You must love your work." I said, "I try to." He started talking to me often when I came in. He told me about his job, his plans, his small dog at home. His eyes were kind, but not sad like Eric's. He was younger, maybe 30. One morning, he brought me a cup of coffee. He said, "You make the office look alive." I smiled and said, "The plants do that, not me." But later, when I walked home, I thought about his words. Maybe I was changing too, slowly, quietly, like the plants I cared for. I did not fall in love again quickly. I was careful. I had learned that love needs more than words. It needs courage. But I also learned something else. Even when someone breaks your heart, you can still grow. Sometimes on Sundays, I went to a park near the river. I liked to sit on a bench and read small books about nature. Around me, people talked, children ran, and dogs barked. Life went on. I felt calm there. One time, I saw a man in a gray coat walking by the river. For a second, I thought it was Eric. The walk, the shoulders, the slow steps. It all looked the same. I almost called out, but then I stopped. It did not matter if it was him or not. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. I watched him walk away until he disappeared behind the trees. Then I looked down at the small flower in my hand. Its stem was thin, but it still stood straight. I smiled. Sometimes I still thought about his words. "I will marry my office." I understood them better now. Maybe he was not wrong. Maybe that was all he knew how to love. But I knew something else. I knew that love can grow anywhere, even in a quiet heart that once broke. That night, I watered my plants before bed. Their leaves shone under the lamp. I touched one softly and said, "You are still here." The room was silent, but full of life. Years passed. The city changed, but my life stayed simple. I still worked with plants. I learned to see how small things live and grow. When I turned 28, I started my own small company. I called it Green Hands. It was just me at first. I took care of plants in small offices and homes. Later, I found 2 helpers. They were young and cheerful. I taught them how to see when a plant is thirsty or tired. They said, You are very patient. I smiled. I said, plants need time. So do people. I still walked the same streets every day. The trams, the sound of rain, the smell of the bakery at the corner. They were all the same. But I was not the same person anymore. I felt stronger. My heart was calm. Sometimes I passed near the old company where I once worked. I never went inside again, but I still remembered every detail. The cold floor, the gray walls, the soft sound of paper. I remembered the plants near the window in Mr. Meyer's office. I wondered if they were still there. One winter morning, I received a call from my old manager. She said, "Greta, do you still remember Mr. Meyer?" I said yes. She said, "He retired last month. The company asked if we can take care of the plants again. They are moving him to a small office for his last year. Would you like to visit?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Yes, I will go." The next week, I went back. The building looked the same, but the halls felt different. Many new faces, many new names on doors. When I reached the top floor, I stopped for a second and took a breath. I knocked on the door. A voice said, "Come in." He was there. Older, thinner, but still the same calm face. His hair was white now. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. "Greta," he said, as if testing if the name was real. I smiled. "Hello, Mr. Meyer." He looked around and said, "You are still with the plant company." I said, "Now it is my company." He nodded. "I'm glad." I walked to the window and looked at the plants. They were still there, tall and green, the same ones I had cared for years ago. I touched a leaf. "You kept them alive," I said. He smiled softly. "I tried. You told me they need light and water." I said, "They also need someone to look at them." He looked at me and said, "I did that too." We sat down for tea. His hand shook a little when he poured it. The office was smaller now, quieter. There were fewer papers, more space, more light. He said, "I think about that time often." I said, "So do I." He looked at me and said, "I made many mistakes." I said, "Everyone does." He said, "I thought I could live with numbers and silence, but silence grows heavy after a while." I said, "It always does." He sighed. "I wanted to call you once, but I didn't know what to say." I said, "Sometimes there is nothing to say. Some things just end." He nodded slowly. "I see you built your life." I said, "Yes, it took time." He smiled. "Then maybe you did better than I did." We talked a little more. He asked about my work. I told him about the offices, the new plants, the young helpers. He listened with quiet eyes. He said, "You did what I couldn't. You grew." After a while, I stood up to leave. He said, "Will you still come to care for them?" I said, "Yes, they are part of my list now." As I walked out, he said softly, "Greta." I turned. He said, "I never married." I said, "I know." He looked at his desk, then said, "But I kept my promise. I married my office." I smiled gently. "And did it love you back?" He looked at the plants and said, "Maybe a little." I walked away slowly. Outside, the winter air was cold but clean. I looked up at the gray sky and felt peace. There was no pain anymore, no anger, just memory, calm and still. In the months that followed, I visited his office once a week. He always greeted me the same way. "Ah, the plant's best friend." We talked about simple things. He liked to hear about the other buildings I worked in. Sometimes he showed me old letters he never sent. They were short notes about days, numbers, weather, and silence. One afternoon, when I came in, his chair was empty. A young man was there instead. He said, "Mr. Meyer is gone. He passed away last night." I stood for a long time and said nothing. The man said, "He was quiet. He worked until the end." I looked at the plants. They were still green. I touched one leaf and said softly, "He kept you alive." That evening, I walked by the river. I watched the lights reflect on the water. I thought about him and his quiet life. He had given everything to his work, his time, his peace, his heart. But maybe, in his own way, he had found meaning in that. I also thought about how different we were. He had chosen to live inside walls. I had chosen to walk outside them. And yet, both of us had loved something. He, his work. I, the life that grew slowly and quietly around me. Years later, when people asked about my job, I told them, "I help things live." Some smiled, some did not understand, but I knew what I meant. At home, my flat was full of green life. Plants stood near every window. Some were old, some new. When I looked at them, I thought of the people I had met, the rooms I had worked in, and one quiet man who once said he would marry his office. Sometimes, I wondered if he ever understood that work cannot love you back, but maybe it does in small ways. Through order, through calm, through the sense that something depends on you. One evening, I sat by the window with tea in my hand. The sky was pink and soft. I whispered, "Goodbye, Mr. Meyer." It felt right to say it. In the stillness, I thought of how people grow like plants. If they get light, they reach for more. Some never look up. They stay where they are planted. But some, even with broken roots, still reach the sun. I smiled. I was one of them. The next morning, I opened my shop early. A young woman came in with a small plant. She said, "It's dying. Can you help?" I looked at the leaves and said, "It just needs care." She smiled. "You sound sure." I said, "I've seen many like this." As she left, I placed the plant near the window and poured a little water. Its leaves were weak but still green. I thought of Eric Meyer and his quiet office, and I felt grateful, not for what I lost, but for what I learned. Some people marry their work. Some marry their dreams. I chose to marry life itself. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to